Look, I genuinely thought the hardest part of this week was going to be the electric bill after leaving the AC running all summer in this tiny Brooklyn apartment. I'm low-key obsessed with budgets. And the thought of merging finances with a thorn? That was stress enough. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the Tuesday afternoon ambush. It was 48 hours before I was supposed to marry Caleb Thorne and his parents. Senator Julian Thorne and Eleanor showed up at my door in Borum Hill. Unannounced. No text, no call, just a polished black car idling illegally outside. And them, standing on my stoop like they were inspecting a construction site. Eleanor stepped into my apartment, the one I paid for myself. Near the subway tracks where the rumble is always a constant background score, and the air immediately felt thick with expensive perfume and judgment. She didn't look at my face. She looked at the worn-out beanie Caleb sometimes left on the bookshelf. "Avery, darling," she cooed, though the endearment was sharp enough to cut glass. "Caleb is unfortunately tied up in a crucial DC meeting. Which is why we simply had to come ourselves." She didn't sit down. She moved straight to the rickety dining table that doubles as my home office. Samuel, the senator, wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held a cold, predatory confidence, the look of a man who's about to win a vote no one saw coming. He pulled a document, 40 pages thick, bound in expensive vellum, from a dollar bill green leather briefcase and placed it squarely between my laptop and the mug I hadn't yet washed. "This is a legal courtesy, Avery, standard protection for the Foundation's legacy," he stated, his voice the smooth, practiced baritone of a man who addresses Congress. "We need your signature tonight. Please review it quickly. It's all rather boilerplate." He pushed a heavy, silver Mont Blanc pen across the table. It slid to a stop right next to my sticky note reminder. "Pay my student loan, $0. The irony was high-key choking me. I didn't move, I just looked at the pen. Then at them. They stood there in my little Brooklyn kitchen, completely overwhelming the space. My quiet sanctuary where I built my ed tech company. Line by line of code. They looked like conquerors surveying captured territory. Absolutely certain I had no options. "Where exactly is Caleb right now?" I asked, keeping my voice level. The smell of the coffee I'd brewed earlier, a small act of normalcy, was suddenly overpowered by Eleanor's sharp, intimidating scent. Eleanor gave that dismissive little laugh that used to make me shrink. "I told you, a deposition, darling, terribly urgent. He's finalizing the arrangements for the Thorne family trust." The lie was so smooth it almost slid by. But I knew Caleb's schedule better than anyone. That deposition was a road trip he planned to take with his old college buddy this week. I finally picked up the prenup. My hands were steady, which was a miracle, because the rage inside felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. As I scanned the opening paragraphs, I saw the true intent. This wasn't protection. This was financial erasure. It was designed to ensure that any future growth of my company, my so-called hobby business, could be claimed as marital asset, subject to their legacy. It was an absolute power grab. Eleanor drummed her perfectly manicured fingernails once on her clutch, savoring what she assumed would be my complete surrender. She thought I was a naive girl from the Midwest suburbs, lucky to marry into their DC orbit. What she didn't know, what she never bothered to investigate during 3 years of treating me like a charming charity case their son picked up, was that the reason I could afford this apartment, this life, the freedom to start my own company, wasn't luck. It was a secret I had paid a heavy price for. The thorniest problem the Thornes thought they were solving was my lack of funds. But I had $10 million USD. I had a lawyer who could dismantle the Supreme Court. And I had a master plan that would erase those conceited smiles for good. You'll want to stick around, because the savage moment when I drop my financial statements on their precious mahogany table is going to be wild. Senator Thorne cleared his throat. "There's no need to analyze every syllable. Avery, we've kept this reasonable." "Reasonable?" I echoed, looking at a clause that would require the Foundation's approval for any major career decisions. "This agreement states I must receive clearance before expanding any business venture established during the marriage." Eleanor waved a hand dismissively. Standard operating procedure for the families we deal with. It keeps things tidy. We simply can't have the Reynolds name compromised by, shall we say, volatile ventures. I laid the document down. My small, cluttered apartment felt like a courtroom. This clause here, I pointed to the paragraph, suggests any technology I develop during the marriage could be subject to the foundation's interest. That affects my existing company, which is already profitable. The senator's face tightened. The pretense of courtesy vanished. The subtext was now loud and clear. We own you now. Sign the paper. He looked down at his watch. A heavy gold timepiece. Show, don't tell. The slow, deliberate way he adjusted the cuff of his shirt and glanced down communicated a cold, absolute power play. We need this resolved tonight. Avery, the wedding is in 2 days, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly threat. We've invested considerably. We're prepared to cancel everything if necessary. You understand the optics of that. He was leveraging the Super Bowl Sunday level of wedding humiliation, canceling the whole thing, leaving me to explain the catastrophic expense and shame to 300 guests. He thought he had me cornered. But what they hadn't counted on was that I already survived the collapse of something much bigger than their backyard barbecue society. And that was the lie. I stood there in my kitchen, the heavy vellum of the prenup warm in my hand, watching Senator Thorne check his gold watch again. His impatience felt like a physical pressure, like the atmosphere was being sucked out of my modest apartment. Eleanor, meanwhile, was pretending to admire the single, chipped succulent on my windowsill. They had no idea what they were dealing with. They thought this was a negotiation of assets. They were about to find out it was a standoff over integrity. I'll need time to read this, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rush. It's 40 pages. Nonsense, darling, Eleanor said, finally turning from the window. It's standard, just sign, and we can all get back to planning the rehearsal dinner. Standard, the word tasted like ash. They used it to dismiss my company, my life, and now, my legal rights. But the word triggered something deeper than anger. It brought me back 3 years. Not to a loving grandmother's house, but to a sterile, glass-walled conference room in Sunnyvale, California. That was where the real money came from. That was the origin of the $10 million secret that simultaneously bought me freedom and built me a cage. I was 26, a lead coder at Data Forge, one of those tech giants whose motto was all about making the world better, while they were quietly spilling the tea on user privacy. I'd discovered a backdoor protocol, a massive, unethical flaw that allowed client data to be misused. When I went to management, they didn't thank me. They tried to erase me. My mentor, the one who told me to trust the system, handed me a choice: go public and be crushed by a team of lawyers who would ensure I never worked in tech again, or take the payout. The payout was staggering. $10 million USD. My retirement, my independence, and my future funded in one lump sum. But it came with an NDA that was an absolute beast. A 50-page document that made the one in my hand look like a cocktail napkin. I had to agree to permanent, total silence. If I ever revealed the true source, or even the existence of the settlement, I'd lose the money and face catastrophic litigation. I took the money. It was the only way to retain my moral compass and my career. The Thornes saw my life here in Brooklyn as proof I had nothing. But for me, the cramped space, the used furniture, the lack of ostentation, it wasn't necessity. It was camouflage. It was essential for maintaining the integrity of that NDA and keeping me out of the spotlight. The truth was, that $10 million wasn't wealth, it was leverage. It was a permanent insurance policy against ever having to compromise my ethics again. Which is why I was able to turn down VC offers that would have cost me control of my ed tech company. I glanced at the two people in my kitchen who believed they could bully me into compliance. Their kind of money screams. My money whispers. And because it whispers, it let me see who people really were when they thought I had nothing to offer. That philosophy had always been my compass. Even with Caleb, I first met him at a foundation gala, ironically, one his parents dragged him to. He wasn't talking about finance or law. He was low-key complaining about the college debt suffocating his life. He'd gone to an Ivy League law school. The whole 9 yards. and was now $280 deep in loans. It wasn't just a financial number, it was an invisible chain that bound him to his parents' expectations. His honesty about the debt, the shame and the crushing weight of the monthly payments, had been a huge green flag for me. It was honest, it was real. We existed in a bubble where our connection mattered more than bank balances. He didn't flaunt his parents' wealth, I didn't reveal mine. We were equals, building a life brick by brick, not trust fund to trust fund. Or so I thought. The senator's voice sliced back into my memory. Avery, we're not leaving until this is done. I have a 9 a.m. flight to DC tomorrow. I knew that flight. It was for the real deposition. The one I now suspected had nothing to do with Caleb's trust and everything to do with his father's hidden financial crisis. I took a breath. I had to know the extent of Caleb's involvement before making my move. Fine, I said, setting the prenup down and sliding my phone toward me. Since Caleb is finalizing trust arrangements, he should be available. I'll just call him to confirm he's fully aware of the severity of this document and its impact on my existing business. Samuel's composure immediately cracked, his lawyer instincts kicked in, and his hand shot out, hovering above my phone. Show, don't tell. The shadow of his expensive cuff across the bright screen was the most telling move of the afternoon, a silent, visceral command to stop. That won't be necessary, he snapped, his baritone losing its smoothness, edges of panic creeping in. He can't be disturbed. You know how these high-stakes legal matters are. And you know how my high-stakes tech business is. Senator, I countered, meeting his gaze. If this affects my company's intellectual property, I consult my partner, especially when that partner is the man I'm marrying in 2 days. I dialed Caleb anyway. The phone rang once before going to a generic voicemail. Someone had deliberately declined the call. I looked up at Samuel and Eleanor. Their faces were a mirror of their internal chaos. The senator was trying to regain his composure, running a hand over the immaculate knot of his tie. Eleanor's chin was quivering slightly. They looked like two desperate people who had just realized their carefully laid trap had sprung empty. They were high-key trying to steal my cash, and Caleb's silence was the smoking gun. I hung up the phone after the failed call to Caleb. The silence in my apartment felt louder than the subway rumble outside. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what had just happened. My fiancé's parents had declined the call. They had effectively put a force field between me and the man I was supposed to marry in 48 hours. We apologize for the interruption, Senator Thornes said, the smoothness back in his voice. But the edges were rougher now, like sandpaper. As you can see, the matter is pressing. If you sign now, we can all move past this. I didn't argue. I just stared at the phone. My gut was screaming, but my brain was already racing back through 3 years of relationship history, searching for the crack I missed. I met Caleb at a time when he was spiraling about his student loans. That $280 in college debt wasn't just a number, it was a character. It sat with us at dinner. It whispered anxieties into his ear at night, and it was the invisible chaperone on every single one of our weekend road trips out of the city. He'd joked that the only thing keeping him from quitting his high-pressure job at the foundation was the knowledge that a bank owned his entire future. He'd tell me stories about his parents, how they used the promise of clearing his debt after law school as leverage, demanding he join the family nonprofit. They never just gave him anything, they always traded it for loyalty. It was their currency, and Caleb was drowning in the exchange rate. I remember a late night in this very apartment. About 6 months into our engagement, he'd been staring at a letter from the bank. The interest rate had spiked again. He was exhausted. I just wish I could sign something. Anything. That would make it all go away. He'd whispered into my hair, his shoulders slumping. Show, don't tell. I felt the profound weight of the college debt slump his entire posture, making him look years older than 30. I had held him, comforting him, knowing I could write a check and solve his problem instantly. But that would have meant revealing my secret, breaking the NDA, and sacrificing the anonymity that kept me safe. More importantly, it would have robbed us of the chance to build a relationship free of financial dependence. I wanted him to choose me. Avery Hayes, the Brooklyn coder, not the silent co-signer. But looking back now, I saw the threads weaving together. Threads I'd intentionally ignored. Caleb wasn't just anxious about the debt. He was becoming increasingly avoidant of his parents' mounting expectations. When Eleanor would dismiss my apartment as quaint, or question my company's scalability, Caleb would squeeze my hand under the table and apologize later. He'd promise that after the wedding, they'd finally back off. He always focused on the finish line, never on standing up to them in the moment. He was a master of the private apology, but a coward in the public confrontation. Last week, when I brought up hiring an outside financial advisor before the wedding, he'd changed the subject, laughing it off as unnecessary. It's just lawyers' avenue. They love paperwork. We can worry about that after the honeymoon. I hadn't seen avoidance. I'd seen patience. I hadn't seen complicity. I'd seen a man trapped by his upbringing. But the prenup sitting on my table was no joke. And Caleb's silence wasn't protective, it was damning. I looked at the senator. His demeanor had changed. He wasn't just smug, he was visibly sweating. A thin film of perspiration across his forehead betrayed the smooth political calm. Show, don't tell. His anxiety wasn't just about this document. It was a desperate reaction to a larger, unseen crisis. Senator, I said, putting a genuine chill in my voice. The only thing more worrying than a highly predatory prenuptial agreement 2 days before a wedding is the desperation of the person presenting it. Eleanor drew a sharp breath. Avery, watch your tone. You have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, I think I do, I countered. This is not standard protection. This is a salvage plan. This is someone trying to acquire my assets to solve a problem that is high-key bigger than a little bit of bad debt. And I'm starting to think that problem isn't mine or Caleb's. It's yours. My words landed like a slap. Their faces went from defensive to terrified. I had hit a nerve. And now I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I wasn't just going to counter their prenup. I was going to find out the true nature of their financial collapse. You need to leave my apartment, I commanded, picking up the document and holding it carefully. I need my legal counsel to review this. You have my word. I will respond by noon tomorrow. The senator stared at me, his eyes blazing with a dangerous mix of fury and fear. He opened his mouth, but Eleanor placed a restraining hand on his arm. They knew I had them. Noon tomorrow, the senator hissed, gathering his composure and his expensive briefcase. Don't disappoint us, Avery. You don't want to become an enemy of the Thorne Foundation. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied. You just might find I'm a much better partner than an adversary. They swept out, leaving the subtle, lingering scent of panic hanging in the air. As the heavy black car pulled away, I picked up my phone and dialed the only number that mattered now, Harold Winters. The moment the senator's heavy black sedan pulled away from the curb, the tension in my apartment broke. I didn't collapse, I moved. Their visit hadn't left me devastated, it had left me focused. I walked straight to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. Show, don't tell. My eyes were wide, but steady. The fear was gone, replaced by the cool, analytical calm I only ever accessed when debugging a massive, complex system crash at Data Forge. The prenup lay on my table, the financial equivalent of a bug report. It wasn't about protecting the Thorne legacy, it was about saving it. And the Thornes, with their arrogance, had just handed me the key to their entire infrastructure. I picked up the phone and dialed Harold Winters. Harold wasn't just a lawyer, he was the legal pitbull who had negotiated my $10 million settlement and protected my identity. He understood the art of the savage move better than anyone. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and sharp. Despite the late hour, Avery, you sound like you just found a zero-day exploit. What's the damage report? I didn't waste time. I explained the ambush, the timing, Caleb's absence, the high-key predatory nature of the clauses. Harold, they weren't trying to protect Caleb's money. They were trying to acquire mine. I need you to find out why they're this desperate. What's the bleed? He listened, the rustling of papers on his end the only sound besides my voice. A forced acquisition 2 days before a wedding. That's not greed, Avery. That's pure panic. I'll start digging into Senator Thorne's foundation holdings and the law firm's public filings. Give me 2 hours. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to Caleb. And document every word of that conversation while it's fresh. I spent the next 2 hours documenting the confrontation. Samuel's nervous sweat. Eleanor's quivering chin. The exact language of the threats. I used the time not to panic, but to organize my own ammunition, my company's latest quarterly reports and the meticulously sealed records of my $10 million settlement. At 11:47 p.m., Harold called back. His voice was low, carrying the unmistakable weight of a lawyer who had just uncovered something explosive. Avery, it's not the foundation that's bleeding. It's the senator's past. A mortgage crisis-era real estate fund the foundation invested heavily in went belly up. They thought they covered it up with a few shell transactions. But someone dug deeper. He paused, letting the information land. Show, don't tell. I could hear him lighting a cigar on the other end, the slow, careful flick of the lighter, a sound of grim satisfaction. A class-action medical malpractice lawsuit was filed 6 months ago. The firm represented a pharmaceutical company in a faulty device case that injured over 50 people. The jury found against the client. The firm is now jointly and severally liable. The judgment is expected to be finalized next month. The number I'm seeing is catastrophic. $15 million USD. I sucked in a breath. 15 million. That explained the panic. That explained why the senator was willing to risk public humiliation. He wasn't trying to prevent a potential future divorce settlement. He was trying to prevent the immediate, total collapse of the Thorne legacy. His life's work, his family's reputation, and his literal home were all on the line. They're not trying to protect their fortune. Harold, I whispered, they're trying to make me their bailout. Precisely, he confirmed. And that prenup? It's their attempt to weaponize your marriage. To make your $10 million settlement the sacrificial lamb for their public mistakes. They profiled you as a small-time entrepreneur with no resources. Someone who would crumble under the threat of a cancelled wedding. The realization was a sharp, clarifying shock. Their motive wasn't simple snobbery, it was desperate fraud. Their move to acquire my wealth wasn't just cruel. It was an attempt to cover up a corporate ethical failure far worse than the one I had left behind in Silicon Valley. Harold, we're not going to just refuse, I said, a cold resolve settling in. We're going on offense. I want a counter prenup drafted immediately. A fair one, protecting both Caleb's inherited assets and my IP. That's smart, he agreed, but I want something else, too, I continued, looking out my window at the sleepless Brooklyn skyline. I want to draft a second document. A legal offer to acquire a controlling interest in the Thorne Foundation's real estate holdings. Enough to cover that $15 million lawsuit and make me the majority stakeholder. I'll save their legacy, but on my terms. I want their debt to become my leverage. Harold let out a genuine, hearty laugh. Avery, you're savage. I love it. You're turning their ambush into a hostile takeover. This is more than a prenuptial agreement. It's a master plan to establish new, definitive family boundaries. Get some rest. I'll have the documents ready by dawn. As I hung up, I looked at the prenup on the table again. It was no longer a threat. It was an invitation to war. A war one was now equipped to win. The documents, Harold's notes, the senator's predatory prenup, and the $15 million lawsuit details, were spread across my kitchen table. It felt less like a quaint Brooklyn apartment and more like the war room of a hostile takeover. I had the facts about the Thornes' financial ruin, but I was still missing the most painful piece of the puzzle, Caleb. I had given him every chance to check in, to apologize for his parents' ambush, to be the man who hated the system. His silence since the failed call was deafening. I grabbed my phone again. I wasn't dialing this time, I was sending a single, cold text message. We need to talk. Now, I know about the lawsuit. His reply was instant, suggesting he hadn't been enjoying a peaceful night's sleep. I'm in a crucial deposition. Avenue, you know I can't. Is everything okay? The audacity was a punch to the gut. The man who had been telling me since the beginning that communication is everything was hiding behind a fabricated legal meeting. I wasn't just angry, I was profoundly disappointed. I called his office line, the one that routes through his DC assistant. Jennifer. It was a shot in the dark. But I needed definitive proof that the deposition was a lie. Jennifer answered, her voice practiced and professional. Thorne Foundation. This is Jennifer. How can I help you? Jennifer. It's Avery. I need to speak to Caleb immediately. It's urgent. I'm terribly sorry. Ms. Hayes. Mr. Thorne is currently in a deposition. He cannot be disturbed until later this afternoon. It was the same rehearsed line the senator had used. But just as she finished speaking, I heard something in the background, a burst of laughter, the distinct clinking of glasses, and the low, sophisticated thrum of background music. It wasn't the silence of a law library, it was the ambiance of a high-end restaurant. Show, don't tell. The muffled sound was a sudden, violent crack in the reality I had built. It wasn't the sound of legal arguments, it was the careless noise of a happy hour. Miles away from the crisis his parents had unleashed. Thank you, Jennifer, I said, ending the call. My hand was shaking as I set the phone down. Caleb wasn't absent because he was weak, he was absent because he was complicit. He wasn't trapped in a meeting, he was enjoying a quiet, calculated road trip of avoidance, knowing his parents were doing his dirty work for him. Before I could even process the full weight of the betrayal, my phone rang. It was him. He had seen the text about the lawsuit, and the cold, definitive silence on the other end of the line must have finally broken his resolve. Avery, don't hang up, please. I just saw your text. What are you talking about? A lawsuit? What did my parents do? His voice was frantic, ragged, stripped of its DC polish. Don't lie, Caleb, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I know about the restaurant. And I know about the prenup. And now I know about the $15 million medical malpractice lawsuit your father is trying to hide. The line went silent. It was a silence filled with heavy, panicked breathing. Where are you, Caleb? I'm near Georgetown. I was at the Cosmos Club. I was supposed to meet them there after the deposition. But they told me to wait. They said it was just a final formality. A final formality that involved telling me to sign away my company and everything I owned to save your father's bankrupt law firm. I cut him off, the years of suppressed rage finally breaking through. You knew they were coming. And you went to a club and let them ambush me in my home. That's not a lack of courage, Caleb, that's calculated betrayal. He choked out a word. The debt. The college debt? I prompted, knowing I was dragging the truth out of him. Piece by painful piece. The $280 you carry like an invisible cross? What about it? They offered to pay it. He confessed, the words rushing out in a terrified stream. They came to me last week. They knew I was spiraling. They said if I just ensured you signed the prenup without involving your legal counsel, they would clear the entire balance. The whole $280. They said it was the only way to save the foundation, and the only way to save me. Show, don't tell. The confession wasn't just a betrayal, it was a testament to the brutal, enslaving power of debt. His voice cracked with genuine, self-loathing shame, a sound heavier than any threat the senator could have mustered. The air in my apartment turned frigid. It wasn't the wealthy Thornes' snobbery that had motivated the attack, it was their desperation. Weaponizing their own son's greatest vulnerability, his financial burden, against me. So you traded me, I stated flatly. You traded 3 years of honesty, 3 years of building something real, for a piece of paper that clears your debt and secures your inheritance. No, Avery, that's not it. I was trapped. I thought I was supposed to have the prenup reviewed first. I had no idea it was this predatory. I thought it was just standard, and that they would pay the debt, and we'd be free of them. His voice dissolved into tears. I made a terrible mistake. I chose financial relief over integrity. I chose the easy way out. I listened to his sobs, feeling a profound, aching sense of loss. I had risked everything, my ethics, my safety, my $10 million secret, to find one relationship free of financial strings. And Caleb, the man who preached against his parents' toxicity, had proven to be the most vulnerable, and therefore, the most dangerous, of them all. Where are you now, Caleb? I asked, closing my eyes. I'm on my way back to Brooklyn. I'm almost at the Holland Tunnel. I have to see you. I have to fix this. You can't fix this with an apology. Caleb, I said, you'll be here in 2 hours. By then, I will have the counter documents ready. You're going to decide if you're standing with your debt and your family's legacy, or with me and the truth. I hung up, the raw, echoing silence returning. The tears weren't mine, they were his. I had all the pieces now, the Thornes' desperation, my leverage, and Caleb's crushing debt. The table was set, and the only path forward was war. The click of the phone disconnecting from Caleb was the final punctuation mark on my past. The man I thought I was marrying was dead. What remained was a strategic problem. A groom paralyzed by $280 in student debt and a set of in-laws using his vulnerability to cover their own $15 million corporate failure. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just got to work. I immediately forwarded Harold Winters the texts from Caleb, the confession of the bribe, and the details of his debt. I needed the human element, the stark proof of their coercion, woven into the legal fabric. Harold, who had been drafting the counter prenup, was on a video call instantly. His 70-year-old face was grim but focused. A bribe tied to a legal document 2 days before the wedding. That's not just leverage, Avery. That's a textbook case of undue influence. The senator just gave us all the ammunition we need to sink him. I was already pulling up the final valuation of my company's intellectual property. Good. We're not just refusing the prenup, Harold. We're replacing it with a document that establishes a new world order for the Thorne family. We worked side by side, me in Brooklyn and Harold in his high-rise office, the glow of our laptop screens illuminating the small hours of the morning. The new prenuptial agreement was elegant, fair, and utterly unyielding. It specified that all my inherited assets, including the $10 million data forge settlement, would remain separate property. Crucially, it contained a rock-solid clause protecting my intellectual property, IP, explicitly forbidding any Thorne family member or foundation entity from claiming interest in my educational technology company. This is perfectly balanced, Harold stated, reviewing the final draft. It protects him just as much as it protects you, regardless of his family's chaos. Now for the second document, I instructed. This wasn't protection, this was the counter-strike. Harold pulled up the documents related to the Thorne Foundation's troubled real estate holdings. I directed him to draft a proposal. Avery Hayes Holdings offers to acquire the majority stake in the foundation's real estate division for $12 million USD. The acquisition will be structured as a cash bailout, enough to cover the entire $15 million medical malpractice lawsuit judgment and restore the foundation's solvency. I explained. But in exchange, my holding company takes control of all future financial decisions for that division. Senator Thorne will effectively become my employee in that venture. Harold leaned back in his chair, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. Show, don't tell. The shadow of his reading lamp caught the glint in his eye. He looked like a general who had just been handed a map of the enemy's unguarded flank. You're not just neutralizing the threat, Avery. You're making them pay for their hubris. You're using your hidden wealth to impose healthy boundaries on their entire dysfunctional family structure. This move is savage. I stared out my window at the Brooklyn darkness, the weight of the moment heavy on my shoulders. They didn't just ambush me, Harold. They leveraged their son's debt against me. They tried to buy his loyalty with my money. This isn't just business. This is about ensuring that Caleb, if he chooses me, is finally free of the financial chains his parents used to control him. By 5 a.m., the documents were finalized, printed, and bound by a courier Harold dispatched. The counter prenup and the acquisition offer sat side by side in my briefcase. I changed out of my clothes and put on a navy dress, not the wedding gown, but a suit of armor. I looked in the mirror. I was no longer the girl hiding a secret. I was the strategic CEO preparing for the most critical boardroom negotiation of her life. I sent Caleb one last text. I'm meeting your parents at the Metropolitan Club at 3 p.m. You need to decide if you want to be there. I'm giving them an ultimatum to save their family. But I'm only giving you one chance to save us. I was walking into a DC institution to meet the man who thought his title granted him immunity. I had the facts, the money, and the moral high ground. The final piece was Caleb. If he showed up, it meant he was choosing integrity over his college debt. If he didn't, The wedding was off, and I would execute the takeover anyway. The counter-strike was prepared. All that was left was the inevitable confrontation. The Metropolitan Club in D.C. felt like a tomb wrapped in velvet. It reeked of inherited power and old-school prejudice, dark mahogany, oil paintings of stern-looking white men, and the hushed, reverent air of a place where deals that change the world are made over dry martinis. I chose it on purpose. Here, Senator Thorne was merely one notable figure. He couldn't play king in his own castle. I arrived at 2:50 p.m. 15 minutes early. Harold Winters was already waiting in a quiet private dining room. His silver hair immaculate, his briefcase containing the two most explosive documents the Thornes would ever see. "Ready for battle?" Harold asked quietly, adjusting his glasses. "I'm ready for them to stop lying," I replied, placing my own small briefcase beside the chair. The navy dress I wore was my armor, projecting the quiet confidence they had always underestimated. At 2:58 p.m., the door opened. It wasn't the senator. It was Caleb. He looked absolutely wrecked. His eyes were bloodshot. His suit was impeccably tailored, but his posture was that of a man who'd just been through an emotional war. He walked straight to me, bypassing Harold, and his hand found mine. His palm was clammy, but his grip was firm. "Thank you for coming," I said, meeting his gaze. "I had to," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. "I realized that if I didn't show up, I would lose you, and I would lose myself to that college debt forever. I chose you, Avery. I chose the truth. Show, don't tell." The fierce, self-loathing determination in his eyes was the real power on the table. He hadn't just arrived, he had surrendered his legacy to stand with me. His presence was the ultimate blow to the senator and Eleanor. They had bought his silence, they hadn't bought his loyalty. At 3:05 p.m., the senator and Eleanor swept in. Precisely 5 minutes late, their last, predictable power play. Eleanor's eyes darted from Caleb to me, then to Harold, the professional pitbull, sitting calmly at my side. Eleanor's smile froze. "Caleb, what are you doing here? You should be resting for the rehearsal dinner." Caleb didn't flinch. He just tightened his grip on my hand. "I'm here to support my fiancé, mother, and to witness the finalization of our prenuptial agreement." The senator's face went crimson. He looked at Caleb like he was a traitorous foreign dignitary. He sat down heavily, his composure already shattered. "We don't have much time," the senator growled, skipping the pleasantries. "Avery, I trust your counsel has reviewed the document. Sign it, and we can all move past this unfortunate misunderstanding." "Actually, Senator, we've come to discuss terms," I said, my voice steady. I slid the senator's original, predatory prenup to the side. "Your document was unacceptable. This," I said, gently placing our counter prenup and the second document, the acquisition offer, in the center of the table. "As our alternative." Eleanor scoffed. "This isn't a negotiation, darling. You'll sign our agreement, or we will cancel the wedding. I'm prepared to call the Drake Hotel this instant." "Go ahead, Eleanor," Caleb cut in, his voice cold and definitive. "I'll call every guest myself tonight and explain precisely why. That my parents tried to financially abuse my fiancé 2 days before our wedding to cover up their own massive financial liabilities." The air pressure in the room felt like it dropped 20 degrees. The senator and Eleanor stared at Caleb, speechless. They had never heard him speak with such finality. Harold took the lead, his voice precise. "Before we discuss this counter document, Senator, there is an issue of full disclosure. Your family has operated under the assumption that Ms. Hayes lacks the resources to defend herself. That assumption is inaccurate. I believe the issue at hand is the $15 million judgment tied to the Foundation's real estate division. Correct?" The senator looked like he'd been hit by a tidal wave. His carefully constructed composure dissolved. "I don't know what you're talking about. That's confidential." I reached into my briefcase, pulled out my own investment portfolio summary, and placed it next to Harold's documents. The print was crisp, the numbers undeniable. "Senator, meet the woman you profiled as a fortune hunter," I said, pointing to the $10.000 liquidation value. "My hobby business was funded by a substantial settlement from a previous employer. My net worth is currently over $10 million USD. All mine before I ever met Caleb. I sat through 3 years of your condescension, your interrogation, and your mother's snide remarks about my apartment, knowing I could buy and sell your entire Lake Forest estate 10 times over. Eleanor's hands flew to her throat, fingering the expensive pearls around her neck. This is a lie. She stammered. It's documented. Eleanor, I corrected, pulling the NDA papers from my briefcase as well. It's freedom purchased with silence. And I only broke that silence today because you tried to coerce me into signing a fraudulent document to solve your mortgage crisis. The senator snatched the financial summary, his face a sickly gray. His eyes scanned the numbers, checking and rechecking the diversification and liquidity. He looked up, the hunter's cold confidence replaced by genuine terror. You had this, all this time? He managed. The smooth politician gone. I did, I confirmed. I wanted to be loved for who I am. You showed me who you are when you thought I had nothing to offer. And now, I know the true cost of the Thorne legacy. Harold leaned in. Now, let's discuss Ms. Hayes's counter-proposal. The first document is a fair, balanced prenuptial agreement protecting both parties equally, including Ms. Hayes's IP. The second document is what you need to save your family name. I slid the acquisition offer across the table. This is my offer to your family. Senator, $12 million cash, right now, to acquire a controlling text, 51% stake in the Foundation's real estate division. That money will neutralize the $15 million lawsuit and secure your legacy. But I will control all future financial decisions for that division. You will report to me. The senator stared at the document, then at the numbers. He was trapped. He could either lose everything, or cede control of his life's work to the woman he had dismissed as a gold digger. You're giving us an ultimatum. He finally choked out, disbelief etched into his voice. The same ultimatum you gave Caleb to solve your problem with his college debt. I replied, my voice unwavering. Except I'm giving you a way to survive. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to sign both documents. If not, the wedding is off, and the press will have the full story of the Thorne Foundation's fraudulent accounting and the desperation that led you to leverage your son's marriage. I rose from the table, Caleb immediately rising with me. He didn't look at his parents. He looked at me, pride and raw love flooding his eyes. We're done here, I said to Harold. The senator and Eleanor were left sitting at the mahogany table, two powerful figures whose world had just been irrevocably flipped by the quiet coder from Brooklyn. Their contemptuous grins had been erased for good. We left them there, sitting in that gilded room in the Metropolitan Club, two figures of immense power, completely stripped of their control. Outside, the DC rush hour traffic was a comforting, chaotic noise, a reminder of the real world waiting beyond the velvet curtains. Caleb and I walked in silence for several blocks. He didn't try to apologize again. The shame was too profound for words. He just held my hand, his grip steady now, the earlier clamminess replaced by warmth. We stopped by the Lincoln Memorial. The great, silent figure of Lincoln looking out over the reflecting pool. They'll sign, Caleb finally said, his voice raw but firm. My father will rage, but he won't let the name crumble. He'll sign the prenup and the acquisition. He'll sign away control to save the legacy. And you? I asked, turning to face him. Are you going to sign the prenup too? You're signing a future that still has $280 in debt attached to it. Your parents offered to pay that off in exchange for my betrayal. He took both my hands. Show, don't tell. The evening air was cold, but the sincerity in his eyes was blazing, burning away the last remnants of his family's influence. I realized standing up to them isn't about their money, Avery, it's about paying off my moral debt to you. He stated, if I took that bribe, I would never truly be free. I'm going back to the firm tomorrow. I'm going to take the promotion I've been avoiding. And I'm going to pay off every cent of that $280 myself. I want the debt, because paying it off is the only way I can finally earn the right to stand beside you as an equal. I'm choosing the man I want to be over the legacy I was born into. That was the catharsis I needed. He wasn't choosing easy wealth, he was choosing integrity and work. He was choosing us. At 9 a.m. the next morning, My wedding day. The heavy package arrived. Inside were the two documents: the fair prenuptial agreement and the 51% acquisition offer. Both signed by Julian and Eleanor Thorne. A short, formal note from the senator confirmed their consent, acknowledging I was a formidable, strategic partner. There was no apology, but their signatures were the truest form of surrender. The wedding was small. We called the Drake Hotel and cut the guest list back to 70 people. Only the family and friends who had supported us. Not the Thorne Foundation's donors. It was simple, elegant, and focused on the vow, not the spectacle. Walking down the aisle, I didn't see the Thornes' humiliation. I saw a clear, new future. Eleanor sat in the front row, wearing a forced smile, but her eyes only met mine when she offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod of respect, the first honest gesture I had ever received from her. The most profound moment came during the toast. Senator Thorne, instead of offering a grand speech about legacy, simply raised his glass and acknowledged me, to Avery, who reminds us that true worth is measured by integrity, not assets. Welcome to the family, partner. 6 months later, the changes are permanent. The $15 million lawsuit was settled using my acquisition funds. The Thorne Foundation's real estate division now reports to Avery Hayes Holdings. Establishing the new order, the senator is still the face of the foundation. But the final financial decisions flow through my CFO. They learned their lesson on healthy boundaries. Eleanor now calls before visiting, actually asking for a time to meet, respecting my packed schedule as a working CEO. Caleb and I live in a modest, newly purchased brownstone in Brooklyn. Both our names on the mortgage, a fresh start. He's working overtime, applying his law degree to environmental policy, paying down his college debt with focused determination. The burden is still there, but it no longer controls him. Sometimes, when he's struggling with a payment, I'll hold his hand and remind him. He's not paying off a debt to a bank. He's paying off a debt to a past version of himself. A version that compromised integrity for an easy fix. We both found the truth in the chaos. The Thornes thought they were saving their name from a lawsuit. But in the end, they saved Caleb from his own weakness. And I saved my ethics from the silence of my $10 million cage. The ultimate victory wasn't the acquisition. It was ensuring our marriage was founded on honest work and unshakable trust. The treasures that hide in plain sight are often the most valuable. And the opponents you never see coming are the most dangerous of all. The real lesson in Avery's story isn't the financial comeback. It's the profound power of establishing unshakable boundaries and paying off your moral debt. For many of us in America, the pressure to conform to legacy, whether it's the burden of crippling college debt, the shame of a lower social status, or the fear of disappointing family, can feel like an invisible, inescapable chain. We are constantly judged by our dollar bills and our zip code, not our character. Avery's journey teaches us that true freedom isn't found in inherited wealth, but in the radical act of choosing integrity over financial security. She kept her $10 million secret not out of greed, but to test whether she was loved for herself. Caleb's confession showed that his $280 student loan was more than a debt. It was the mechanism his parents used to control his soul. His liberation began not when the money was offered, but when he willingly chose to face the debt, choosing moral solvency over a quick, unethical fix. This story is a powerful reminder that we must proactively define the terms of our own value. Don't let shame, debt, or the need for family approval dictate your worth. When someone asks you to compromise your ethics for their comfort, that is the moment to reveal your true, formidable self. Use your boundaries as your own NDA against emotional and financial manipulation. What is the moral debt you're trying to pay off right now? A secret you keep? A boundary you need to set? Or an expectation you need to shatter? Share your story of choosing integrity over expectation in the comments below. You are not alone in this fight for autonomy. Wishing you the strength to stand tall in your truth.